Just a note, I've asked the folks in the booth to do a little extra today, and if it doesn't work out, it's not their fault. It's mine, all mine. Times, they are a-changin'. I'm telling you, Dylan had nothing on us. When I was a kid, computers had just transitioned from the group of 80 talented women mathematicians doing calculations day and night to a machine that did those calculations 1,000 times faster. And why do we need a computer to do them faster? The critical calculations that drove the invention of the modern computer and let those women get some sleep were needed so we could effectively aim our weapons on the windy, rainy, killing fields of World War II, the war that happened 20 years after the war to end all wars. In our wildest, most vivid dreams, we could never have imagined the changes computers would bring, so it's no wonder we weren't ready for them. It always seemed incredible to me that the phone/computer we carry in our pockets are more powerful than the ones that guided us to the moon and back. And as Nobel laureate and bongo player extraordinaire Richard Feynman pointed out in his talk, there's plenty of room at the bottom. There is almost no limit to how small we can shrink things. Imagine, he mused, a computer where each bit, that's each piece of information, is a single atom. I'm still a chemist, if a retired one, and like most of my contemporaries, I live in 3 worlds at once. I'm sure that explains a lot. The one where water is wet, the one where water has a symbol H2O, and the world of atoms and molecules, where an oxygen atom is covalently bonded to 2 hydrogen atoms at an angle of 105 degrees. Bringing back old memories, am I? Vibrating and tumbling as it moves through space. It's the world of atoms where our incredible shrinking computers are headed, thanks to Feynman. Now, I've felt for a long time that it was important to try to illustrate just how small atoms are. One way is to consider the fact that it would take about 500,000 atoms to stretch from one side of a human hair to the other. A second way is to realize that if an atom were the size of an orange would be the size of the Earth. But the best illustration I've found comes from the series Powers of 10, created by Charles and Ray Eames in 1977. On the next slide, we start with a man lying on a blanket in Chicago at a magnification of 1 meter by 1 meter. For those of you who don't speak metric, a meter is about a yard. Watch the next slide.
At 1 meter, 10 to the 0 power. Now we reduce the distance to our final destination by 90% every 10 seconds, each step much smaller than the one before. At 10 to the minus 2, 1/100th of a meter, 1 centimeter, we approach the surface of the hand. In a few seconds, we'll be entering the skin.
At that magnification, we can see the folds of his palms in much more detail. In the next slide, we take it down another 1,000-fold.
Crossing layer after layer from the outermost dead cells into a tiny blood vessel within. Skin layers vanish in turn. An outer layer of cells, felty collagen. The capillary containing red blood cells and a roughly lymphocyte. We enter the white cell. Among its vital organelles, the porous wall of the cell nucleus appears. The nucleus within holds the heredity of the man in the coiled coils of DNA.
There it is, the DNA. Okay, is that small enough? I can't see any atoms yet. We can see the DNA in the white blood cell. Finally, when we increase the magnification another 1,000-fold on the next slide,
As we close in, we come to the double helix itself, a molecule like a long twisted ladder whose rungs of paired bases spell out twice, in an alphabet of 4 letters, the words of the powerful genetic message. At the atomic scale, the interplay of form and motion becomes more visible. We focus on one commonplace group of 3 hydrogen atoms bonded by electrical forces to a carbon atom. 4 electrons make up the outer shell of the carbon itself.
no, they don't. But hey, actually that carbon is sharing its electrons, as carbons like to do. They're actually shared with the 3 hydrogens in another atom, which isn't shown. As you can see, atoms are vanishingly small. There's lots of room to shrink. It was that statement by Feynman that launched the nanotechnology revolution. We now have technology to pick up those individual atoms and arrange them. On the next slide, you see a picture of atoms, made by atoms, arranged in a Star Trek logo by IBM scientists in 2017. The scientists utilized a special microscope operating at minus 268 degrees centigrade, that's 5 degrees Kelvin for you nerds, and moved the atoms one at a time on a surface, and then magnified the whole thing 100 million times. The nanotechnology industry is by now 3/4 of a century old, well into creative adulthood. We're already seeing nanomaterials in cosmetics and clothing, but more to the point, there is very active research trying to figure out how to build nanomachines. There's one now that's about 120 atoms that could piece together other atoms in any order we want to potentially produce anything our hearts desire. Some predict that in as early as 30 years, we'll all have nanomachines that can make a cup of coffee, the mug you drink it from, and the table you put it on, all from dirt, air, water, and a carbon source like acetylene. It would even be able to replicate itself. Eventually, there would be one for each and every one of us, and with our own personal nanomachine, we could make anything we ever needed. There would be no need to work, no need for money, no need to rely on another human being for your subsistence. What happens to our computer-based economy? What would it do to our social fabric, to our sense of self, to our psychological well-being? This vision comes from a series called Connections on the subscription-based website CuriosityStream. James Burke, a well-known broadcaster, science historian, and author, takes us through a series of historical events that he threads together to get to such provocative places as the end of scarcity, that's what I was just talking about, designer jeans, the CRISPR kind, not the Levi kind. And none of this is real. A look at the advent of AI-empowered robots that for all the world could be mistaken for one of us. Each presents a compelling argument for the pace of change rising exponentially, especially as it relates to what it means to be human, as quantum computers, big data, artificial intelligence, the internet, and perovskite solar cells catapult us into the very different world from where we've come. To paraphrase Burke, if even one of these futures comes to pass, it makes sense to begin planning for it, don't you think? So why are we so caught up in war and hate and violence instead of how we make sense of all of this? I believe the source of this ineptitude is our delusional belief that we humans are something special. We have this insatiable need to keep demonstrating it, even if the only way to win is by destroying our entire species and much of the rest of life with it. I put it this way because, as the late George Carlin so correctly pointed out, the planet will recover just fine from anything we choose to do to ourselves. The idea that we are the center of everything goes way back, of course, apparently to the creation of Adam. According to that story, we can be a jealous lot, Cain killing Abel because God liked Abel better. These days, we've flipped the script, killing those whom God dislikes because they don't worship him right. And if you're spending your time crusading to smite God's enemies or to die with the most cookies, there's precious little time to stop and think about where all of this is heading, let alone if we want to go there. Now, don't get me wrong, we have made progress towards dethroning ourselves. Though it took the sacrifice of Galileo, most of us have accepted that the planets, suns, and other stars don't revolve around us here on Earth. In fact, on the next slide, we find ourselves the third planet from a standard-sized yellow star in a solar system located on the arm of our 13.2 billion-year-old spiral galaxy, the Milky Way, that is composed of between 200 and 400 billion stars, at least 100 billion planets, and 100 million of which may support life. I often wonder how our view of ourselves will change when we find life on even one other planet. And thanks to Erwin Hubble, we've realized that this is only one of billions of galaxies in a universe that's expanding with ever-increasing speed for reasons we don't understand. What's more, many cosmologists believe there are an infinite number of universes, which of course would mean there's an infinite number of you and of me and of everything. That's how infinity works. But it does make you wonder how important we humans really are. Nevertheless, and despite all the evidence to the contrary, we're constantly trying to stay on our pedestal by finding things we do that no other species can. We used to think we were the only one to use tools. Turns out we have that in common with at least 10 other species, from orangutans to ants. We said we were the only ones with feelings, that every other species only acts on instinct. Yet we've witnessed elephants grieving over their dead, dogs with literal smiles on their faces when they see us, dolphins protecting humans for no apparent reason, and cats. I don't know what to say about cats, except that the neighborhood cat gives me the coldest stare when I turn on the blower and disturb his sleep. Time and again, our attempts to show how we're special have failed, and for a good reason. We aren't. We share a common ancestor, alive some 8 million years ago, with chimpanzees and bonobos. We also share 98.7% of their DNA. All the astronomical, archaeological, and genetic evidence points to our commonality with all living things. As podcaster Aubrey Marcus put it, you are comprised of 84 minerals, 23 elements, and 8 gallons of water spread across 38 trillion cells. You have been built up from nothing by the spare parts of the earth you have consumed, according to a set of instructions hidden in a double helix and small enough to be carried by a sperm. You are recycled butterflies, plants, rocks, streams, firewood, wolf fur, and shark's teeth, broken down to their smallest parts and rebuilt into our planet's most complex living thing. You are not living on Earth. You are Earth. Looking at things this way is my version of a walk in the woods, a version I whisper to myself, usually unconsciously, as I move through the world. The goal, which I'm not very good at, is to bring that world to consciousness as often as possible. Meditation comes to mind, though for me it never gets past my mind. I was always drawn to the worldview that's often ascribed to Native Americans, where we give thanks to the creatures who give us lives, who give their lives so we can eat. I truly believe that if we humans could see ourselves in the life around us instead of above it, or put there by God to oversee it, real change would be possible. Ironically, or maybe not so ironically, this is the main lesson of quantum mechanics. And before you say, oh no, here he goes again, I'm not talking about spooky action at a distance or wave-particle duality. The lesson is that there is no such thing as an impartial outside observer, despite the fact that it's supposedly the first requirement of the scientific method. our Western science need to observe from afar, that our Western science needed to observe from afar was doomed from the start. You affect the world, and it affects you merely by the act of observing it. Interaction creates reality. And the reality I desire, if I'm to successfully ride the winds of the coming hurricane of change, is one that I find here, in this congregation. While I'm very supportive of the idea that we should expand our relationships to people who see the world very differently, to respect the inherent worth and dignity of every person, it's great to live in a community where I can share the ways I see the world with people who freely lend me their own ideas in an atmosphere of respect and community and a good bit of tolerance. Thank you very much. And more importantly, a community that cares for one another and works to keep this experiment in liberal religion alive and thriving in southeastern North Carolina. As change continues to accelerate, I plan to do all I can to support this place of loving, thinking, giving folk who show me every day how wonderful it is to be in community, especially this community. May it be so. Amen.